I'm Mr. Hamstead, and welcome to history class. Throughout the semester, just had a kebab. Throughout the semester, we've been talking a lot about important people and events throughout American history. But something we have neglected is talking about what life was actually like for people living in early America. While most Americans were English immigrants, there was an American culture starting to kind of form. And because of this culture, America was starting to look a lot more different, looking a lot more different than the rest of the world. Looking different from the rest of the world. So this video is going to provide an overview of the culture and the structure of American society from its creation up until around like 1820-ish. Give or take. Kidding me right now? So America, even to this day, can be roughly divided into two sections, being the North and the South. Early America consists of four major sects of people, those being white males, women, Native Americans, and African Americans. So let's jump right in with white males. Everyone loves white males. Before we talk about white males, let's talk about the South. The South is mostly plantations. Plantations are big farms that only grow one crop, but they grow a lot of that one crop. Plantation owners were overwhelmingly white males, considering women could not own land at the time. Early American white men can be broken down into two more categories, being rich and poor. Both rich and poor white men were free. However, it was only the wealthy white men that were able to really own land or vote or take advantage of slaves. And if only rich white men could vote, then who do you think they're gonna vote for? Other rich white men. So these wealthy white men in the South still did not really live in the luxury or splendor, right? Seeing that these plantations were very far away from town. So without the influence of other people, the plantations really became their own small communities. The plantations would have the home of the planter, the big building, it would have the service buildings, barns, it would have cabins for the slaves. And these rich white men that ran these plantations were really politically and socially in charge of other people. And I don't just mean that in terms of owning slaves. Rich, white, southern land-owning men were also in control of poor white men. These poor white men in the South were typically small, independent farmers that did not own slaves. Now, they lived in these self-contained communities and were controlled by the land-owning rich white men. It's important to note that poor white men could vote, but their voting was more limited. It wasn't really the same thing. That's enough about the South. Let's go to the religious and Puritan North. Rich white men still dominated the political and social aspects of everyday life. However, there are some differences between the rich white men of the North and the rich white men of the South. This is starting to just grind my gears. In the North, rich white men were typically college educated, and instead of living in their own little isolated communities like the Southern men, these Northern rich white men lived in the city, and they would have these town meetings. They would live alongside other rich white men together, and they would just come together and do rich white men things. And because the community was really living and working together alongside each other, these towns would draw up these agreements among the prestigious members of the community. They would hold these town hall meetings to promote unity and harmony. Wow, that's a lot about white men. Let's move on to the ladies. In both the North and the South in early America, the family unit was really, really important, and women played similar roles in early America regardless of wealth or status or even race. Women did not have the ability to vote or own land. In pretty much every capacity, women were expected to be homemakers. The woman's main goal is to get married and have some babies and to get busy. The main role of African American women was much the same as it was for white people, surprisingly. So African Americans had no rights in the first place, so white and black women really shared in that capacity of not having any normal human rights. There were people like Abigail Adams, who's the wife of John Adams. Boo! Abigail Adams is like woo, though, okay? Because she's a huge advocate for women's rights, and she is a key voice in the upcoming fight for those women's rights. A little foreshadowing for you there. So Abigail Adams, you gotta know, is famous for her quote, "Remember the ladies. Remember them." Thanks, Abby. Moving on with our family unit, we have this structured family where fathers would teach their sons how to fish and to farm and to build homes, and when the sons were old enough, well, they'd get married and teach their sons the same thing. Mothers taught daughters how to cook and clean and complete other household tasks. The children worked a lot. There was not a lot of play, so they would gather firewood and they would prepare the peas and corn for cooking and storage. There was not much time for play, but there were some dolls, marbles, and spinning tops. Slow down there. And sometimes they were able to go ice skating and sledding during the winter and attend barn raisings, quilting bees, and corn huskings. The kids were like, "Mom, can I please go to the corn husking tonight? I gathered the firewood and I prepared the peas for cooking and storing." The mom's like, "I don't want you going to the corn husking with that Elizabeth girl. She had her ankle out at the quilting bee last week." I'm sorry. Also, education was very important for young adults. These young adults would attend public or private schools, and then craftsmen would apprentice under a master craftsman for a few years before opening his own shop. So basically, if you were like a woodworker, you would work for a guy who was a woodworker, and then you would learn how to do it, then you'd open up your own shop. Okay, that's enough white people for today. Let's get colorful. Besides white men and women, there were Native Americans that lived in North America. And let me tell you, Americans are so bad to them. I mean, Americans take everything from the Native Americans. It's honestly horrible. Natives were not considered legal citizens of America, so they continually had their land taken by force or by settlers making a deal with them. They would be like, "Oh, we have like 100 guns and like 25 horses, and we need that for like this land." And the natives would be like, "Oh, for real?" And they would like shake on it, and then we'd show up to the land and they'd be like, "Cool, where are those guns?" And we'd be like, "Right here." You know? No, I don't mean to make light of it. Honestly, a horrible, horrible thing. Anyway, we would take their land and then we would not ever let them come back ever, not even a little bit. With natives, there's this really poppin' area back in colonial days, the Ohio River Valley. Everyone wanted to be at the Ohio River Valley. It was like freaking LA. "Mom, I'm leaving, I'm going to the Ohio River Valley. I'm gonna chase my dreams." So the Ohio River Valley was very fertile, and so the Americans obviously were like, "I want that." So in 1795, in 1795, the Treaty of Greenville pretty much just pushed 3 whole Native American tribes right out of the Ohio River Valley like it was nothing. The abuse got so bad that the natives had to look to the British for help. And let me tell you, it doesn't go very good. This guy, Tecumseh, the leader of the Shawnee tribe, was like, "You know what? Oh, I'm gonna make my own Native American nation where everyone's free to practice how they want to and to do the things that they want to do and not be oppressed." Sound familiar? So he goes to the British and says, "Oh, I'm gonna make this new nation." And they're like, "We'll help you." Anyway, long story short, the Shawnee capital was burned to the ground on the banks of the Tippecanoe River. And when America found out that the British were helping him, it was on. Basically, if you heard all of that, but you didn't really listen to it, remember that one thing is that American settlers and Native Americans do not get along, and they will never get along. And to this day, the Native Americans have just been shafted by settlers. So finally we have African Americans, and during this time period, the vast majority of African Americans were slaves. After the creation of America, it got a little harder to justify slavery. The very first words of the Declaration of Independence are, "All men are created equal." And that just wasn't really the case at all in America. See, George Washington was quoted as saying that slavery is a necessary evil. This phrase was really used to justify the use of slaves. This got even worse when a guy named Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. Eli Whitney and his cotton gin make the cotton industry explode. So the growth of cotton in the South made it really, really difficult to own a plantation without having slaves. Little statistic for you, 75% of African Americans lived on large plantations with 50 or more slaves. Educating those slaves was not only uncommon, but was actually illegal in a lot of areas. And because those slaves were so uneducated, and many of them were born into slavery, there was no real way to really combat slavery. Slaves only knew what they were told by their masters, and their masters would lie about scripture and about the world outside just so that they can control them more, slaves were truly powerless in most aspects of life. As America began to develop its own culture and it slid into this groove, many Americans started to realize that slavery was horrible. And this is prodded on by something called the Second Great Awakening, which is this religious revival where people really address the moral issues in their life. And because of this, people are saying, well, shouldn't we not own slaves? Why are we whipping these people and forcing them into labor with really nothing in return? This early American period is really a birthplace of a lot of reforms. If I give you a chunk of Play-Doh and I tell you to form it into a hamburger patty, you take it and you change it into that. And then if I say, oh, turn it into a snake and you roll it up, you're forming that. If I tell you to form an opinion on something, you create that opinion. But if you reform, you take what you had and you remake it. America was created to be the land of opportunity, where any person could become anything. And up until the 1820s, America was just another country run by rich white men. You could argue that that's the case today. Americans really realized that they needed to form into something new, or reform this country, so that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or religion, has an equal opportunity to succeed. But isn't that ironic, as the first words uttered by the first men to call themselves Americans were, all men are created equal? Even though this period of time we're going to discuss is a period of reform or reformation, one could look at it and say that, well, these reforms, the abolition of slavery and the fight for the rights of women, for people with special needs, for the persecuted, the uneducated, for the disenfranchised, does not change the original foundation of this country, but instead it shapes it into the provider of life and liberty as was originally intended. Just a thought. I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and remember that you need to always keep learning and get that work done. I'm Mr. Hamstead, and I'll see you next time.